Year 10 and 11, welcome to your analysis of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde with a focus on how Hyde is presented as an animal. So if we have this extract in mind, so you know exactly what I'm referring to throughout, and the question, starting with this extract, explore the extent to which you think Stevenson suggests that Hyde is more like an animal than human. Write about how Stevenson presents Hyde in the extract, how Stevenson presents and develops ideas about the Hyde's lack of humanity in the novel as a whole. Okay? So if you just either pause the video and take a read through this section, or if you've got the book, have it in front of you, we'll start there and then we'll move to the rest of the novel. So again, this is the extract. If you've got the book, have it in front of you. If you need to pause the video, do so. And make a note of any quotations you think you would analyse in terms of the question, which was Hyde as an animal. The quotations I've picked out then are: broke out in a great flame of anger, with ape-like fury, he was trampling his victim, the bones were audibly shattered. So the top one then, broke out in a great flame of anger, is a metaphor implying that Hyde is maddened to the point of sheer rage, maddened by this innocent good man, Danvers Carew, and broke out further outlines this idea that Hyde has been repressed by Jekyll and is somehow unleashed. And again, broke out has those connotations of someone or something that's being trapped. This links us straight into with ape-like fury and reminds us of the theory of evolution. So remember, at the time the book was released, we had Charles Darwin's theory of evolution also doing circulation, and it's this idea that civilized behaviour is learned. Hyde symbolises the basic animalistic part of man, and this idea that everyone has a Hyde in them, it's how we suppress it. And obviously the link there is that Hyde is ape-like. He's not a man at all, and this reference to an animal is the very question that we are asked. We are later told that he was like a monkey jumping around. So ask yourself whether or not Stevenson is very subtly suggesting that man has evolved in the way that Charles Darwin suggested. If you want to go further in your analysis, look at the word fury. It links to the quotation above about the flame of anger, and it has connotations of hatred. This idea that Hyde hates the innocence of Danvers Carew. He hates the fact that he's a good man, and it's this conflict between good and evil. Obviously, in this instance, evil wins. He was trampling his victim. We've had that before. We've had that in chapter 1. Sorry, I've made a little typing error there. I've put if instead of. I apologise. It reminds us of chapter 1 and the innocent girl that was trampled. Now, if we look closer in our analysis at the word trampling, it is symbolic of the man being crushed in a barbaric and unprovoked attack. So not only has he killed him, but he's trampling on top of him as well. Again, it's this behaviour that isn't civilised. And remember, throughout the book, Stevenson contrasts this civilised aspect of man and London and versus the barbaric side of man and London, whereby everything's a little bit darker and a little bit dingier, and we are acting out our pleasures and sins and desires. The bones were audibly shattered. Now, obviously, look at the word shattered. Hyde completely destroys him, and he even destroys the body so that the bones are even shattered. So it's not enough to club him down, but then he has to trample on top of him and destroy the very body of the victim. And audibly shows us that you can actually hear the fact that he is being destroyed as well. It's as though this goodness in Sir Danvers brings out the most intense and the most pure form of evil in Hyde. And don't forget, later on, when Jekyll is describing turning into Hyde, he talks about pure evil and the fact that he's tenfold more wicked. Okay. A potential opening sentence and answer might read something like this. Throughout the novella, Stevenson presents Hyde as an animal who is not part of civilised society, but rather a part of humanity and human existence. The idea that man has a dual nature, consisting of evil versus virtue, and or the cultured versus the animalistic. So that might be what your opening looks like. I'm going to now look at quotations from the rest of the book that we could potentially analyse in a question about Hyde as an animal or in a question about Hyde. From the rest of the novel then, we have got his name. Don't forget we can analyse the word Hyde. And remember, Hyde is the rough skin of an animal. So again, we have this link to him representing an animal and a person whose evil side is animalistic and barbaric. The fact that he's described as hairy and ugly as well, very simple adjectives link us back to this ape-like description we get. A number of times he's described ape-like and appearing to be like a monkey. So that again has this idea of, or this connotation or this link to something that is an animal, something that is not wholly human. And don't forget, if you're looking closer at the adjective ugly, you have got the reaction that other characters have to him. Remember, he's described as deformed quite a few times. The fact that Enfield, Utterson, Lanyon, the maid, can't describe him properly. The hissing intake of breath. Now, hissing, this is my interpretation, so please feel free to disagree, reminds me of a snake. And I think this is a link to temptation and the Garden of Eden. And remember, this story in the Bible was believed to have corrupted all of mankind and the natural world. And this idea that the fall seemed natural and the contrast of an angel and a fiend, again, all from the novel. So if we're talking about temptation, this is a huge reference to the book, because Jekyll becomes Hyde because he wants to live out sin, desire and pleasure. He is tempted into the darker workings of life and man's desires. And remember, Eve is tempted by the snake to eat the apple. Temptation, this desire to sin, gets mankind thrown from the Garden of Eden and thrown from heaven. Banished. And there is that link there, that temptation that leads us to sin, and that in essence is Jekyll and why he transforms into Hyde. Utterson also describes him as troglodyte. Now that might be an unusual word for you, but basically that is an animal living underground. Or a person of primitive and degraded brutal character. I think in any question on Hyde you should use this if you get the question about him being an outsider or him being frightening, because that one word, as Utterson describes him as a troglodyte, an animal living underground, is answering the question again. Now, an animal living underground is hidden. We know that Hyde hides. Look at his name. The fact that he only comes out at night. He's only seen in the dark. Later on in the novel, we're told Jekyll had a mask on. He had to put on the thick cloak of Edward Hyde. This disguise. Don't forget, one word quotation, disguise, is also used in the novel. Okay. And then another quotation I've added before I just give you some basic notes is, he must be deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity. I did say deformed was an important word because it's used a few times. And as I say, this is a pattern in the novel because no one can describe him. The suggestion is that his appearance is mysterious and language cannot describe this creature, slash person, who seems to exist beyond mankind, doesn't he? Nobody can describe him. It's as if the English language hasn't quite got the words that's needed to describe this animal. So we get, well, he's ape-like and he's hairy and he's ugly and he hisses and he has a savage laugh and he's deformed, but actually I can't quite describe him. It's very mysterious and unnatural. I hope that's helped so far. I'm just going to give you some more basic notes now on things we might mention and or say, and then that will be this video finished. So when we are dealing with Hyde, we know that he's presented as a creature on a few occasions. He is also presented as depraved because his crimes are violent and unprovoked. So the little girl, trampling over the little girl, the innocent little girl, and also killing the innocent good Danvers Carew are linked because they're both unprovoked. And again, it's this idea that good people bring out the most intense hatred within Hyde. and again contrasts are key in the novel, and it's this conflict of good versus evil. Now, unfortunately for the reader, in this novel, evil perseveres, doesn't it, really? Because at the very end, he actually has to take his own life to suppress the evils within him. And finally, any question on Hyde has to deal with his appearance. Remember, we're told he's ugly. He repulses everyone who sees him. He's small, shrunken and deformed. His physical presentation is symbolic of hideousness. And don't forget, at the time the book was written, physiognomy was believed in, and that is the idea that you can judge someone's personality based off their appearance. Now, this is clearly working within the book, isn't it? Because this deformed, evil look that Hyde carries around is actually his exact personality and his exact persona. The idea that his stature is quite small and he shrinks, doesn't he? And remember, when he describes the change, he says, "I had lost in stature," is symbolising repression. The fact that that Jekyll has had to keep Hyde locked in, and that's why when he attacks, he breaks out, doesn't he? This idea that he's being trapped. There's another section of the book that describes Jekyll looking like a disconsolate prisoner. So again, it's this idea that all the time this trapped notion means that when Hyde is unleashed, the repercussions are going to be severe. And again, this link to Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution. If you see the image of the theory of evolution, it's like a small ape into a slightly bigger ape, into an ape that's trying to stand up, into a standing up ape, into a man. And this small stature that seems throughout the book to grow, doesn't it? And because evil becomes huge within the novel, reminds us again of the theory of evolution. The fact that this idea that did we originate from apes, and if so, is this primitive man, and do we all hold this primitive barbaric side within us, and it's just a matter of time before it is unleashed. I've said a lot there, so I hope this has been useful on Hyde in terms of Hyde as an animal, or Hyde with key quotations. Pause the video wherever you need to note down key quotations, and good luck in your English literature exam.